If you look at what is happening between Washington and Ottawa right now, it doesn't look like diplomacy. It doesn't even look like a negotiation. It looks like a knife fight in a parking lot. For decades, the United States and Canada shared the most integrated economy on the planet. Two countries, one machine, seamless, synchronized, boring in the best possible way. But as of this morning, boring is dead. Donald Trump tried to squeeze Canada on critical minerals. He thought he was dealing with a pushover. He thought Mark Carney would do what every Canadian prime minister before him has done. Fly to Washington, smile for the cameras, accept the terms, quietly surrender, and call it a partnership. He was catastrophically wrong. Carney didn't negotiate. He didn't soften. He didn't send an envoy with a handshake and a compromise. He launched an economic counterstrike that landed so hard the Dow Jones is still bleeding. And the shockwave from that decision is tearing through supply chains, pension funds, and grocery store shelves on both sides of the border right now. Trump is raging, Capitol Hill is panicking, and most of the media is talking about the wrong thing entirely. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what happened, who miscalculated, and why the economic architecture you've relied on your entire life just cracked down the middle. So let's stop guessing and start looking at the facts. Here is exactly what unfolded in the last 72 hours. It started, as these things always do, with an ambush. President Trump, furious over Canada's new Critical Minerals Protection Act, which restricts the export of raw lithium, cobalt, and nickel to any country that doesn't have a reciprocal processing agreement with Ottawa, decided to go nuclear. He appeared in the Rose Garden on a Tuesday afternoon, flanked by his trade advisor and the Secretary of Commerce, and announced an immediate 30% tariff on all Canadian metals, lumber, and processed mineral exports entering the United States. But he didn't stop there. He signed an executive order directing the Department of Defense to begin sourcing critical minerals exclusively from Australia and domestic U.S. mines, effectively attempting to cut Canada out of the American defense supply chain entirely. He called it Operation American Bedrock. He said, and I quote, "We will never again let a foreign country hold America's national security hostage." Now, usually this is where Ottawa panics. This is where the phones start ringing. This is where a Canadian delegation boards a plane and arrives in Washington with talking points about mutual respect and shared values. That plane never took off. Instead, Mark Carney convened an emergency session of the Canadian cabinet, and within 6 hours, he appeared on national television. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look defensive. He looked like a surgeon walking into an operating room, calm, precise, already 3 steps ahead. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Canada's resources are not for sale under duress. We will not be extorted by our neighbor. And we will respond not with anger, but with consequences." He didn't yell. He didn't insult anyone. But the words landed like a sledgehammer. And then he laid out the consequences. First, Canada would immediately suspend all critical mineral exports to the United States. Not reduce, suspend, effective at midnight. Second, Canada would fast-track an emergency minerals trade agreement with the European Union and Japan, redirecting supply chains that took 30 years to build. Third, Ottawa would file a formal challenge under the USMCA and simultaneously launch proceedings at the World Trade Organization. And fourth, Canada would impose retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural exports, specifically targeting soybeans, corn, and pork products overwhelmingly produced in Republican-held swing states. The internet didn't just break. It detonated. Trump fired back within minutes. He called Carney a failed banker playing prime minister and threatened to invoke emergency powers to freeze Canadian financial assets in U.S. banks. But while Trump was rage posting, the markets were already rendering their verdict, and the verdict was brutal. For the White House, let me show you the receipts because the numbers tell a story that no speech and no tweet can spin. Receipt number 1, the critical minerals shock. Within 2 hours of Carney's announcement, lithium futures spiked 18%. Cobalt jumped 12%. Why? Because the United States doesn't just buy Canadian minerals for convenience. It buys them because it has no alternative at scale. Not today, not this year. 73% of the rare earth processing capacity that feeds the U.S. defense sector runs through Canadian facilities. You want to build an F-35? You need Canadian nickel. You want to build an Abrams tank? You need Canadian cobalt. You want to build the batteries for the next generation of electric vehicles that every single American automaker has bet their future on? You need Canadian lithium. Trump said he'd source from Australia. That's a great soundbite, but Australian mines can't replace Canadian volume for at least 4 to 5 years, and that's if everything goes perfectly, which in mining, it never does. The Pentagon knows this, defense contractors know this, and by yesterday evening, Lockheed Martin stock had dropped 4%, and every major EV manufacturer was in emergency board meetings. Trump didn't just shoot himself in the foot, he shot the entire U.S. defense industrial base in the kneecap. Receipt number 2. The agricultural backlash. This is where Carney's scalpel really starts to cut. Canada is the second largest export market for American agriculture. When Carney targeted soybeans, corn, and pork, he wasn't picking random products. He was picking the products that matter most to voters in Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Indiana. States Trump cannot afford to lose. Within 24 hours of the announcement, the American Farm Bureau Federation released a statement not supporting the president, warning him, they said, and I'm paraphrasing, these retaliatory tariffs could cost American farmers $14 billion in annual export revenue. We urge the administration to return to the negotiating table immediately. That's not the opposition talking. That's Trump's base. That's the Corn Belt telling the White House, you are about to destroy us. And the farm futures markets confirmed it. Soybean futures dropped 6% overnight. Pork belly futures cratered. The money doesn't lie. The money is saying Carney found the pressure point, and he is pressing on it with both hands. Receipt number 3, the international pylon. This is the part that should terrify the White House. Because while Trump was focused on punishing Canada, Carney was on the phone building a coalition. Within 48 hours of the crisis, the European Commission released a joint statement with Ottawa expressing, quote, deep concern over the use of unilateral tariffs to coerce allied nations. That's diplomatic language. Let me translate it for you. It means Europe just publicly sided with Canada against the United States. But it didn't stop there. Japan's trade minister made a statement calling for stability and rules-based order in critical mineral supply chains. South Korea reached out to Ottawa about accelerating a bilateral minerals agreement. Even the United Kingdom, Trump's supposed closest ally, issued a statement through the Foreign Office calling for de-escalation and dialogue. Do you see what's happening? Trump tried to isolate Canada. Carney isolated the United States. But it didn't stop there. Japan's trade minister made a statement calling for stability and rules-based order in critical mineral supply chains. South Korea reached out to Ottawa about accelerating a bilateral minerals agreement. Even the United Kingdom, Trump's supposed closest ally, issued a statement through the Foreign Office calling for de-escalation and dialogue. Do you see what's happening? Trump tried to isolate Canada. Carney isolated the United States. He picked up the phone. He called Brussels. He called Tokyo. He called London. And he said, look at what they're doing. Do you want to be next? And every single one of them said no. Carney weaponized his Rolodex. He used every relationship he built at the Bank of England, at the Bank of Canada, at the Financial Stability Board. He activated the global network that Trump has spent years alienating, and it worked. The U.S. is now facing not a bilateral dispute, but a multilateral front. Trump wanted a cage match. Carney turned it into an intervention. So let's talk about why this is happening. Why is the President of the United States, the leader of the most powerful economy on earth, losing a confrontation with a country whose entire GDP is smaller than California's? It's because Trump fundamentally misreads what power is. Trump thinks power is size. He thinks power is volume. He thinks if you're the biggest, you automatically win. But that's not how the modern economy works. The modern economy runs on interdependence. It runs on networks. It runs on trust. And Trump has spent the last several years systematically destroying trust with every single trading partner the U.S. has. He burned bridges with Europe over NATO spending. He burned bridges with Asia over semiconductor tariffs. He burned bridges with Mexico over immigration threats. And now he's burning the last bridge, the one to the north, the one that was supposed to be fireproof. Carney understands something Trump doesn't. In a networked world, the node that everyone trusts has more power than the node that everyone fears. Fear makes people comply temporarily. Trust makes people cooperate permanently. Trump is feared. Carney is trusted. And right now, trust is winning. Now let's talk about Carney's playbook because it's brilliant and it's ruthless and most people are completely missing it. Carney is not trying to beat the United States. He knows he can't. Canada's economy is a tenth the size. Canada's military couldn't project power past its own coastline. But Carney isn't fighting a war. He's fighting a negotiation. And in a negotiation, you don't need to be stronger. You need to be more patient and more strategic. Carney is doing three things simultaneously. First, he is raising the cost of aggression. Every tariff Trump imposes now has a price tag, a real one, measured in jobs lost in Michigan, measured in fighter jets delayed at Lockheed Martin, measured in soybean futures crashing in Iowa. He's making sure that every single action Trump takes hurts Trump's own voters more than it hurts Canada. Second, he is building alternatives. The emergency trade talks with Europe and Japan aren't just symbolic, they are structural. Carney is telling the world, if the U.S. doesn't want our minerals, you can have them, and we'll give you a better deal than Washington ever offered. He is creating competition for Canadian resources, and competition drives up the price and increases Canada's leverage. He is making Canada more valuable to the rest of the world precisely at the moment when Trump is trying to make Canada irrelevant. Third, he is controlling the narrative. Watch his press conferences, watch his interviews. He never insults Trump personally. He never raises his voice. He speaks in data. He speaks in paragraphs. He presents charts. He references trade law. He is boring on purpose because boring is the opposite of chaos. And the world is starving for boring right now. Every time Trump posts a rant at 2 a.m., Carney releases a calm, detailed, footnoted policy statement at 9 a.m. And the contrast is devastating. The financial press is calling Carney the adult in the room. The Economist put him on the cover with a headline, "The Quiet Counterpunch." He is winning the information war without throwing a single insult. Let's talk about time, because this is where it really gets dangerous for Trump. Trump operates on a political clock. He needs wins, he needs headlines, he needs rallies where he can say, I crushed Canada, I brought them to their knees. He needs that clip. He needs that moment. Carney doesn't need any of that. Carney's approval rating in Canada is climbing every single day this conflict continues. Every threat from Trump is a recruitment poster for Canadian unity. Carney's numbers went up 9 points in 72 hours. 9 points. In Canadian politics, that's an earthquake. The longer this drags on, the stronger Carney gets at home and the weaker Trump gets in the swing states. Carney can wait. Trump can't. And Carney knows it. He has set the cruise control. He has buckled his seatbelt. And he is daring Trump to keep driving toward the cliff. So why should you care? Maybe you live in Texas. Maybe you live in Oregon. Maybe you live in London or Sydney and you think this is just two North American leaders having a shouting match. But this isn't a shouting match. This is the sound of the global economic order cracking. If you work in manufacturing, brace yourself. The parts you need to build things are about to get more expensive or disappear entirely. If you drive a car, watch the price of batteries. Lithium just became 18% more expensive, and that's just the beginning. If you eat food, and I assume you do, watch what happens to grain prices when the U.S. farm sector starts eating $14 billion in lost exports and passes the cost on to consumers. If you have a 401k or a pension, look at your portfolio. Look at how much of it is tied to companies that depend on cross-border supply chains. The answer is almost all of it. This isn't politics. This is your money. This is your job. This is the price of your groceries next month. But beyond the economics, something deeper is happening. Something historic. We are watching the moment when the United States stopped being the unquestioned leader of the Western world. Not because it was conquered, not because it was overtaken, because it chose to alienate every friend it had. Canada was the last holdout. Canada was the friend who always showed up, the friend who fought beside America in every war, the friend who shared intelligence, shared water, shared power grids, shared a 5,000-mile border without ever needing a wall. And the United States just told that friend, you're either with us on our terms or you're against us. And for the first time in history, Canada said, fine, then we're against you. Do you understand what that means? If Canada, the most loyal ally the United States has ever had, walks away from the table, who stays? Does Germany stay? Does Japan stay? Does Australia stay? We are not watching a trade war. We are watching the unraveling of an alliance system that kept the world stable for 80 years. And it's not being unraveled by China. It's not being unraveled by Russia. It's being unraveled by the White House. So where does this end? Honestly, I don't know. And anyone who tells you they do is lying. But I see three paths forward. Scenario A, the slow bleed. Both sides hold their positions. Tariffs stay in place. Retaliatory measures grind on. The border doesn't close, but it thickens. Trade slows. Prices rise. Both economies take damage, but the damage is slow enough that neither leader is forced to capitulate. This drags on for months, maybe a year. Eventually, exhaustion brings both sides to the table. The deal they make is worse than what they had before. Everyone loses, but everyone survives. Scenario B, the spiral. Trump, unable to tolerate defiance, escalates further. He freezes Canadian assets. He closes border crossings. He pressures U.S. banks to cut off Canadian credit lines. Carney responds by cutting off mineral exports entirely and accelerating the pivot to Europe and Asia. The Great Lakes industrial corridor collapses. Auto plants shut down. Energy prices explode. A recession hits both countries within months. Congress revolts. The 25th Amendment starts getting whispered about in hallways. This is the worst case. It sounds extreme, but nothing about the last 72 hours has been normal. Scenario C, the realignment. Carney succeeds in building a new trade architecture. Canada diversifies away from the U.S. permanently. European and Asian markets absorb what the U.S. rejected. Canada becomes a critical minerals superpower with multiple customers instead of one. The U.S. loses its privileged access forever. Trump gets a short-term political win with his base, but inflicts a long-term strategic wound on American power that takes a generation to heal. I think we're in scenario A right now, but every tweet, every ultimatum, every late-night Truth Social rant pushes us closer to scenario B. And Carney is quietly, methodically building the infrastructure for scenario C, just in case. Here's what I know for certain. The relationship you grew up with, the one where Canada and the U.S. were inseparable, is over. It might be rebuilt someday, but it will never be the same. Trust, once broken at this level, doesn't come back with a handshake and a photo op. Carney just proved that a middle power with the right leverage, the right allies, and the right leader can stand toe-to-toe with the United States and not blink. But standing your ground has consequences. The bill is coming. For Americans, for Canadians, for everyone plugged into the North American machine. The only question left is who pays more. Do you think Carney is saving Canada's sovereignty, or is he gambling with an economy that can't afford to lose? Do you think Trump will back down, or will he drive straight off the cliff and dare gravity to stop him? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to see what happens when the markets open tomorrow, and believe me, tomorrow is going to be ugly, make sure you're subscribed. This story is moving faster than anything I've covered in years. History doesn't wait. Don't blink.